The countdown was ticking, each second echoing the inevitable doom. Humanity, once at the apex of its civilization, was now a broken species, scattered and hunted like prey. The alien invaders, known as the Aerith, had swept across Earth with unparalleled efficiency. Their fleet, a massive armada of relentless warships, had decimated major cities, leaving nothing but smoldering ruins. In just a matter of weeks, they had taken control of nearly the entire planet. Every attempt at resistance had been met with brutal force. Major world governments had crumbled under their assaults, and all that remained were ragtag groups of survivors. Humanity was on the verge of extinction. There was no way to win. The Aerith had superior technology, weapons capable of annihilating entire populations with a single strike. The last stronghold, a fortress hidden beneath the Earth's surface, was humanity's final refuge. Inside the cold, dimly lit war room, General Sarah Calloway stood before a holographic map of Earth. Her once confident demeanor had begun to erode under the pressure of the impending end. The map, however, didn't show victory. It only showed death. The remaining Aerith fleet was closing in on their last bastion, and the only option left was to deploy a final, desperate weapon. "General, the last hope is ready," said Dr. Samuel Reyes, his voice quiet but laced with a heavy sorrow. He was humanity's last remaining scientist, the only person who had the knowledge to deploy the device. The last hope was a gamble, a weapon of such devastating power that it could wipe out everything on Earth, including the Aerith, but at an unimaginable cost. There was no way to know if it would even work. It was a weapon that had been kept hidden for generations, designed only for the event that the species faced total annihilation. If activated, the last hope would either end humanity's suffering once and for all, or obliterate their civilization entirely. Sarah turned slowly to face Dr. Reyes, her eyes clouded with doubt. The decision was not easy. She could still hear the voices of the fallen, her soldiers, her family, her friends, who had all perished in the war against the Aerith. The burden of leadership had always weighed on her shoulders, but now it felt like a crushing weight. Was she really ready to pull the trigger on her own people's extinction, even if it meant ending the alien menace? "We have no choice," Sarah said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "Activate it." Dr. Reyes hesitated, his fingers hovering over the holographic interface. The room fell silent, save for the soft hum of machines and the distant thrum of the planet's last breath. Then, with a single touch, the countdown began again, this time for the last hope. But as the seconds ticked away, something unexpected happened. A warning light flashed on the holographic display, and a message appeared in bright red text. "Intruder detected." The room went still. Sarah's hand instinctively went to the sidearm at her hip. It was an automatic reaction, though she knew there was no longer any point in hoping for a surprise victory. The last hope was humanity's last and final act, and they were on the verge of committing to it. How is this possible? Reyes muttered, frantically typing commands into the system. The holographic map distorted. The Aerith fleet, which had been closing in, suddenly began to shift. They weren't just coming in. There was something different in their movements. Something deliberate. Then the unthinkable happened. The massive Aerith warships halted, their engines flickering out one by one. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. It was as though they had been frozen in place. A strange, pulsating energy began to emanate from the heart of their fleet. A wave of force, like a cosmic heartbeat, rippled across space toward Earth. It was a signal. The last hope had triggered something else, a warning of sorts, one that the Aerith didn't expect, one that hadn't been accounted for in their plans. Reyes looked at Sarah, his eyes wide with realization. It's not just the Aerith that were the threat. It's them. They are not the invaders. They are the invasion's vanguard. Sarah's heart pounded in her chest. The message had been clear. The Aerith were nothing more than pawns in a much larger, far more dangerous game. There were forces at play, entities far beyond the Aerith's comprehension, and they had just made their move. In the shadow of the planet's destruction, what had once been humanity's final hope had now become the catalyst for something far worse, a war not just for Earth, but for the survival of everything in this galaxy. You said. The room fell silent. The sudden stillness of the Aerith fleet was unnerving, a stark contrast to the frantic chaos that had gripped Earth for months. General Sarah Calloway stood frozen, her mind racing. Dr. Samuel Reyes, typically composed under pressure, had a look of pure disbelief on his face as he scanned the data stream, his fingers moving rapidly across the holographic console. How could this happen? He muttered to himself. Sarah's gaze was fixed on the blinking red lights on the screen, indicating the Aerith warship's sudden inactivity. The countdown for the last hope, still ticking down to its deadly conclusion, seemed irrelevant now. There was something bigger, something far more dangerous in play. Who are they? Sarah asked, her voice steady but demanding. The ones who just triggered this pulse? Reyes didn't answer right away. He seemed lost in thought, his mind piecing together fragments of data he'd only recently uncovered. Data that had never made it to the war room. The truth was, no one had truly understood the Aerith. All they had known was their cruelty and their insatiable desire to conquer and destroy. The Aerith had arrived in fleets, wiped out Earth's military infrastructure in days, and now it seemed like they were retreating, or worse, waiting. Reyes' voice broke through the thick tension. This doesn't make sense. It's not the Aerith pulling the strings, they're just agents. This pulse. I've seen this before, but only in ancient texts. In legends. The Aerith are only pawns in a far greater scheme. The true power behind the invasion, it's something older, far older, than we ever realized. Sarah's pulse quickened. You mean the Aerith aren't the true invaders? No, Reyes said, his voice trembling. They're the first wave. The harbingers. Suddenly, the atmosphere in the room grew colder. The air around them felt charged, as though the walls were closing in. The holographic display began to shift once again, this time showing something unexpected. The black void of space was filled with hundreds of new, unfamiliar signatures, distant, but unmistakably vast. The Aerith ships hadn't stopped because they were retreating. They'd stopped because their creators had arrived. Sarah leaned forward, the full weight of the situation hitting her with a crushing force. What are we dealing with here, Reyes? Reyes's face was pale, his hands now shaking. It's the children of the void, General. They are the true invaders. The children of the void? Sarah repeated, her voice quiet with confusion. I've never heard of them. No one has, Reyes said grimly. At least, not in any way that would make sense to us. They are a race, or I should say, a collective of entities that exist outside the realm of our understanding. For eons, they have seeded chaos across galaxies, using their vanguard, be it the Aerith or other species, as their tools. They are ancient, and they never stop. They destroy civilizations, strip entire worlds of life, and then move on to the next one. They are the endgame. Sarah's mind struggled to keep up with a rapid flood of information. The children of the void, they were more than just a legend. They were real. And now they had set their sights on Earth. The human race wasn't simply fighting an alien invasion. It was fighting a preordained extinction event. The pulsating energy wave that had emanated from the Aerith fleet grew stronger, and Sarah's eyes narrowed. It was an invitation, a beacon. The children of the void were not interested in Earth's destruction alone. They wanted something more. And somehow Earth's resistance, its unwillingness to give up, had triggered this response. The Aerith, despite their overwhelming power, were mere instruments of this greater plan. But humanity had become the wrench in the gears. A complication. We can't just sit here and wait for them to land, Sarah said, her tone more forceful than she intended. We need to act now. We need to fight. Reyes turned to her, his expression dark. Fighting them will be pointless. The children of the void, they don't just kill. They consume. They erase the very fabric of existence. If the Aerith are pawns, the children are gods, an ancient force that bends reality itself. But there's got to be something we can do, Sarah snapped. We can't just throw our hands up and let them destroy everything. Reyes swallowed hard. We're not ready. But I might know someone who can help. Sarah raised an eyebrow. Someone? Who? A man, Reyes said, pulling up a new data screen, showing a face that Sarah had hoped she would never see again. A scientist, like me, but one who left the project when he saw what the children could do. He's out there, somewhere. I've kept tabs on him. He might have a way of stopping this. But we need to find him before they do. Sarah's eyes narrowed. This was humanity's last chance. If this scientist had any hope of defeating the children of the void, then she had to find him, no matter the cost. But time was running out. The children of the void were almost here, and if they reached Earth, the fate of the human race would be sealed. With no other choice, Sarah made a decision. Prepare a team, she ordered, her voice hard as steel. We're going hunting. You said. The underground complex that housed humanity's last survivors was a vast labyrinth of tunnels, reinforced steel doors, and flickering lights. Once a haven for research and military strategy, it had now become a ghost town, its corridors hollowed out by the exodus of the majority of its people. Only a few brave souls remained to defend the planet from an enemy that seemed impossible to defeat. General Sarah Calloway's footsteps echoed through the silence as she walked down one of these abandoned halls. Behind her, Dr. Samuel Reyes was lost in his thoughts, his eyes glued to the datapad, absorbed in the mission ahead. The team they were assembling was small, but they were all experienced. Each one of them had survived against the odds, and now they would have to pull together in the fight for humanity's survival. Sarah stopped in front of a nondescript door, a reminder of the days before the invasion when it was meant to be a place of planning and analysis. Now, it served a much darker purpose. She knocked twice, a signal. Inside, the door slid open to reveal a familiar face, Lieutenant Alara Stone, one of the most capable soldiers Sarah had ever commanded. Alara's piercing green eyes scanned the general's face, her expression unreadable. She'd been a fierce warrior, but the war had taken a toll on her. Like all of them, she carried the weight of loss. General, Alara greeted her with a slight nod, and then glanced at Reyes. We ready to go hunting? Sarah nodded. We need to find a man named Rook. He's our best shot at surviving this. Rook. Alara raised an eyebrow. That name rings a bell, but I thought he was dead. He's not, Sarah replied grimly. And he's the only one who can help us stop the children of the void. Reyes has tracked him down. We're going to find him, and if we can, we're bringing him back. Alara crossed her arms, considering the information. You realize the children are already here, right? Every minute we waste is another step closer to our extinction. I know, Sarah said quietly, but we've got one shot. We'll find Rook, get him to help us, and then we'll make our stand. With that, Alara's expression softened. If anyone can do it, it's you, General. You've always known how to win against the odds. Sarah's lips tightened. The war had been brutal, the losses countless, but there was no room for doubt now. Time was running out. She turned to Reyes. Where do we start? Reyes hesitated for a moment, then tapped a few commands into his datapad. The screen flickered, revealing a set of coordinates. A location far outside the war-ravaged cities, deep in the wilderness. He's here. This is where we're going. Alara glanced at the coordinates, and her lips curled into a faint, ironic smile. You weren't kidding. This is in the middle of nowhere. Exactly, Reyes said. Rook likes to stay off the grid. After what happened to him, he's become a recluse. But he has the knowledge we need. Sarah nodded sharply. Get the team together. We leave in an hour. The transport shuttle hummed to life, the low thrum of its engines vibrating through the steel hull. Inside, Sarah, Alara, Reyes, and a small team of hand-picked soldiers prepared for the journey ahead. Outside the shuttle's reinforced windows, the Earth they knew was a shattered landscape. Burnt skies, smoke rising from distant fires, and ruined cities as far as the eye could see. The Aerith fleet was still hovering nearby, waiting for something, but now it was the children of the void that haunted their every step. The mission was simple. Find Rook, bring him back, and pray he had the answers they needed. But Sarah knew it wouldn't be that easy. It never was. As the shuttle lifted off, Sarah sat back in her seat, her thoughts drifting to the countless battles that had led them here. Each one had taken its toll, but this one was different. The children of the void were not just conquerors. They were an existential threat. Their arrival meant the end of everything. Earth, humanity, the very fabric of reality itself. No one had ever faced anything like them, and if Rook couldn't help them, there would be no victory. There would only be oblivion. Alara, sitting beside her, broke the silence. "Do you think we can really stop them, General?" The question hung in the air like a weight. Sarah didn't have a good answer. She had led them through so much, and yet, this time, even she wasn't sure. "We don't have a choice." Alara looked out the window, her face hardening as the landscape shifted beneath them. "Then let's make sure they regret ever showing up." Hours later, the shuttle landed in the heart of the wilderness, far from civilization. The area was desolate, the remnants of a once thriving ecosystem now reduced to ashes and dust. Only a few miles away, the ruins of a small, isolated town remained, a hollow shell that hinted at the destruction the children of the void would bring if they succeeded. The team disembarked, weapons ready, scanning the surroundings for any signs of life. Rook's hideout was supposed to be a remote cabin, nestled in the foothills of an abandoned mountain range. It was a place where no one would find him unless he wanted to be found. "We're close," Reyes muttered, eyes glued to his tracker. "We just need to move fast." Sarah led the way, her instincts honed from years of warfare. Alara followed, her eyes darting back and forth, ever watchful for any sign of trouble. The others spread out, forming a perimeter. But as they neared the cabin, the air seemed to change. There was a strange, oppressive feeling, as though something was watching them. The hairs on the back of Sarah's neck stood on end. "Something's wrong," Alara said, voice low. "I don't like this." Before Sarah could respond, a low, guttural growl echoed from the shadows. The sound sent a ripple of unease through the team. They weren't alone. And then, from the darkness, a figure stepped into the light. It wasn't Rook. The figure was tall, its skin a sickly shade of gray, its eyes glowing with an unnatural light. It wasn't human. It wasn't even Aerith. It was something else entirely. The children of the void had found them. The creature that stepped out of the shadows was unlike anything Sarah had ever seen. Its form was twisted, shifting as though made from some dark, fluid substance. Its skin a pale, unnatural gray that seemed to flicker in the dim light. Its eyes, if they could even be called eyes, were vast pools of black with an iridescent glow that pierced through the darkness. There was no question. This thing was not of this world. Not of any world that had ever been seen or touched by human eyes. The team froze, weapons raised instinctively, but Sarah's mind was racing. She had expected danger, had expected enemies, but not this. This was something far worse. The pulse they had felt before, the distortion in the air, all made sense now. This creature, whatever it was, wasn't a mere scout or soldier. It was something far greater, something that had come with the children of the void, part of their twisted intelligence. "Stay calm," Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible over the rush of her heartbeat. "We don't know what it wants yet." But Alara, ever the pragmatist, was already stepping forward, her rifle aimed at the creature's chest. "What do you want?" she called out, her voice steady despite the tremor that ran through her hands. The creature didn't respond with words. Instead, it tilted its head slightly, its glowing eyes narrowing as though it were studying them, its form writhing like smoke in a breeze. And then, without warning, it let out a low, resonant hum, an inhuman sound that reverberated deep in their bones, like the voice of the void itself. For a heartbeat, everything went still. And then, a crackling noise shattered the silence. It was like the air itself was bending under the pressure of something unseen. The creature began to move again, but this time it did not approach directly. Instead, it split literally. Its form seemed to fragment, stretching into multiple dark, ephemeral shapes that seemed to stretch across the landscape, vanishing and reappearing in an instant. "Contact," Alara shouted. "Multiple targets." Before Sarah could react, one of the dark forms lunged, its tendrils of shadow reaching for one of the soldiers. He barely had time to scream before the creature's touch consumed him entirely, leaving nothing but the empty air and the sound of cracking bones. "Fall back," Sarah barked. "Get to the cabin." It was chaos. The remaining soldiers fired rapidly, but their weapons seemed ineffective. The bullets passed through the creature like water, leaving no mark, no sign of damage. The dark figures continued to multiply, surrounding them, closing in. Their movements were erratic, shifting in and out of reality, a blur of unnatural motion that defied any sense of logic. Reyes, desperately tapping his datapad, shouted over the din of battle, "These aren't just physical entities. They're projections or perhaps avatars. I think they're controlled by something, someone." "Who?" Sarah snapped, eyes scanning the battlefield. She could see Alara moving with swift precision, gunning down the dark figures that dared come too close. But there were too many. The odds were rapidly slipping away. "I think," Reyes's voice trembled, "I think they're the heralds of the children of the void themselves. We've never seen them in such form before, but these entities, they're not alive. They're manifestations of the void." Just then, the ground beneath their feet seemed to tremble, a deep rumbling, as if something enormous had just shifted beneath the earth. A dark energy pulsed from the forest ahead, and the creature, the original one, appeared before them once again. But this time it was not alone. Another figure emerged from the darkened forest, tall and imposing, its presence suffocating. It was a being of pure shadow, indistinct but undeniably real. A second herald, and this one was far larger, far more terrifying than the first. "We've got a bigger problem," Alara muttered, backing up slowly. "I don't think we can kill these things." Sarah's mind raced. They needed Rook, but the situation had already spiraled far beyond anything she could have prepared for. These creatures, the heralds, were not just threats. They were messengers, designed to destroy humanity's will to resist. And they were doing it with terrifying efficiency. "Reyes, what do we do?" Sarah demanded, her eyes scanning the darkening horizon as more of the shadow figures continued to gather. I don't know," Reyes stammered. "But we can't fight them like this. We need to disrupt their connection to the void. If we don't, they'll keep coming until we're all gone." Sarah's eyes narrowed. Disrupt their connection. She needed to buy them time. Her gaze flicked to the cabin, the last semblance of safety in the wilderness. If they could get inside, fortify the place, maybe they could hold out long enough to figure out a plan. But the moment she thought it, the dark figure that had appeared earlier spoke. "You cannot win," it said, its voice a low, unsettling murmur that seemed to crawl under Sarah's skin. "You are nothing. The void is eternal. Your resistance is but a flicker in the darkness. We are the end, and you will not survive." Sarah's grip on her rifle tightened. She could feel the weight of the creature's words, the bleakness of its certainty, but she refused to yield. Humanity had faced insurmountable odds before. They had won against impossible foes. "This is not the end," Sarah replied, her voice cold and defiant. "We may not win today, but this war is far from over, and you're not going to get Earth without a fight." The shadow figure shifted, seeming to shrink at her words, as if it hadn't expected such defiance. It tilted its head, considering her response. Then, with an eerie calm, it let out a low, rumbling laugh. "You think you matter? You think you can stop what has already been set in motion? We are coming, and nothing you do will change that." Sarah steeled herself. "We'll see about that." She turned to her team. "Fall back to the cabin, now. Move, or we're all dead." The team obeyed without hesitation. But as Sarah took one last glance at the towering shadow figure, she felt a chilling certainty in her bones. The war was no longer just about survival. It was about the very nature of existence. They weren't just fighting an alien race. They were fighting the void itself. "You said." The cabin loomed ahead, a small and seemingly insignificant structure in the vast wilderness. But to Sarah and her team, it was the last bastion of hope in a world that was quickly slipping away. The sun had long since dipped below the horizon, casting the world in an oppressive twilight. The air crackled with an unnatural energy, and the ground beneath their feet seemed to pulse with a faint but steady vibration, almost like a heartbeat. "Move, move, move," Sarah barked, her voice cutting through the tension as she urged the team forward. Behind them, the shadows gathered, closing in. The heralds, these dark, mind-bending creatures, had only grown in number, and they were relentless. Each one of them was an avatar of destruction, a manifestation of the children of the Void's twisted will. And now they were hunting them down with terrifying precision. The team rushed toward the cabin, weapons drawn, scanning every corner of the surrounding woods. But they didn't need to wait long. The first wave of shadow figures appeared from the trees, their unnatural forms flickering and shifting like smoke in a storm. Sarah didn't hesitate. She opened fire, her rifle spitting rounds into the nearest dark entity, but the bullets passed through it as though it were made of air. "Keep moving," Sarah shouted. "We need to reach the cabin." But the moment they reached the door, the ground shook beneath their feet. A deep rumble, like the roar of an earthquake, tore through the earth. The ground cracked open in a jagged line, sending a shockwave of energy outward. From the fissure, a massive shadow emerged, a larger figure, more solid than the rest. It was the original creature, the one that had spoken to them, now fully manifested. It towered above them, its eyes glowing with a malevolent intensity. The team scrambled inside, slamming the door shut behind them, but it was clear that the cabin wouldn't hold for long. The creature outside could tear through it with ease. "Reyes," Sarah shouted, turning toward the scientist. "What do we do? How do we stop them?" Reyes was already at the small console in the corner of the cabin, his fingers flying over the keys. "I've been analyzing their energy signature. If we can disrupt the flow of energy between the heralds and their connection to the void, we might be able to weaken them." Sarah didn't wait for more details. She knew they didn't have much time. The windows shattered as more of the shadow creatures surged forward, their forms splintering into several smaller versions of themselves, each one closing in on the cabin with unnatural speed. The air was thick with the hiss of their eerie, otherworldly voices, and the floor beneath their feet seemed to bend under the weight of the void itself. They were everywhere, and they were closing in on them. "Do you have the coordinates for the disruption device?" Sarah demanded, her voice steady despite the chaos unfolding around her. "Just a few more seconds," Reyes said, his voice strained. "I'm almost there." The walls shook violently as the massive shadow figure outside slammed into the cabin with enough force to rattle the entire structure. The door splintered, and the dark entity pressed its tendrils against the weak wood, a relentless pressure that threatened to break through at any moment. Ilara fired a shot into the nearest shadow figure, but her bullets dissolved before they even hit it. She cursed under her breath and moved to cover the others, her back against the cabin wall. "We're not going to make it like this," Ilara muttered, her eyes scanning the darkening wilderness. "They're too strong." Sarah's mind raced. She could feel the weight of their impending doom hanging over them. But they couldn't give up. Not now. Not after everything they had fought for. Earth wasn't just their home. It was the last hope of every species that had ever fought to survive in the galaxy. They couldn't let it fall to the children of the void. "Reyes," Sarah said, her voice fierce. "Activate whatever you need to. Now." With a final, determined press of a button, Reyes turned toward them, a glint of hope in his eyes. "Done. I've calibrated a pulse generator. If we can get it outside, it'll send out a massive electromagnetic wave. It won't destroy the heralds, but it will sever their connection to the void, at least for a short time. We'll have an opening." A deep, rumbling laugh echoed from outside the cabin. The shadow creature had finally broken through. It loomed in the doorway, its massive form blotting out the dim light of the evening sky. Sarah's pulse quickened, but she didn't flinch. They had one chance to turn the tide. "On my signal," she said, glancing at her team. "Ilara, you and I will provide cover. Reyes, get the pulse generator out there." Ilara nodded, her rifle aimed at the creature's glowing eyes. "You got it, General." The shadow creature raised its hand, tendrils lashing out in all directions, but just before it could strike, Sarah gave the command. Now, the door slammed open, and Sarah and Alara charged forward, firing as they went. The creature shrieked, recoiling momentarily from the barrage of gunfire. It was only a brief distraction, but it was enough. Reyes rushed out the door, pulse generator in hand, the electromagnetic device glowing faintly with blue energy. The dark creatures surrounding them hissed in fury, but the pulse generator was already activated. A wave of energy rippled outward from the device, sending a shock wave that fractured the air itself. The heralds faltered, their forms distorting, their connection to the void momentarily severed. For a split second, they became solid, vulnerable. Fire! Sarah shouted. Alara unleashed a volley of shots, her aim true. The dark figures began to dissipate, their forms flickering and evaporating into nothingness. But the larger creature, its tendrils writhing and seething, still loomed. Reyes, you have to make it stronger. Sarah shouted over the roar of the battle. Reyes began, but his voice was lost in the sound of the void creature's shriek. The energy was fading too quickly. In that moment, Sarah knew what had to be done. She didn't hesitate. Cover me, she shouted to Alara. Without waiting for a response, Sarah dashed toward the creature, her heart pounding. She wasn't sure if she could defeat it, but she had to try. The last hope of humanity depended on it. As she reached the creature, it lashed out with a massive tendril, but she rolled under it, her movements sharp and swift. She had only one shot at this. The pulse generator was their key. If she could get close enough to the creature and plant it inside its core. In a flash of determination, Sarah lunged forward and shoved the pulse generator into the creature's chest. It howled in rage as the device hummed louder, its light flickering. And then, boom! A burst of energy blasted outward from the generator, a wave that seemed to ripple through time itself. The shadow creature screamed, its form breaking apart, as the heralds around them disintegrated into nothingness. The forest went eerily quiet. The ground shook one final time before everything fell still. Sarah collapsed to her knees, exhaustion flooding her limbs. Alara rushed over, helping her up. It's over, Alara whispered. For a moment, all Sarah could do was breathe, her heart racing. The void had been repelled, for now. The children of the void had been momentarily halted, their connection severed. The battle was won, but the war was far from over. The children of the void were not easily dead.